everyone. Good morning. Is anyone in the afternoon yet? No,
We're morning enough.
we'd be going back in time. So, Qasim, thank you for having this chat. This is our premiere Substack Live for our Repro Ready newsletter. I've gone
Yeah,
live once before with our friend Salam, but that was his live. So, this is our first one that we're leading.
it's great to be here. You guys are doing critically important work on public health, reproductive justice, women's rights, all the good things, and it's my privilege to partake in this conversation with you.
I'm having technical difficulties with my tripod, as you can see.
You're fine.
Okay.
Good.
So did we meet at the DNC last year?
I think we did briefly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And then have become friends since then.
we're coming up our 1 year friend anniversary.
Oh, yeah. Is that August then?
I think so.
Okay. Cool. Well, we became fast friends because I tend to come to you with like major law related questions, human rights related questions. Given your background, I highly respect like all of the content that you put out. And when you're talking about the news, you do it all through a human rights lens. And I feel like that's very relevant to something that I wanted to learn more about or have been reading a lot about over the last few weeks regarding Trump's executive order on that is now going after private law firms, which I see coming down the pike as an attack on repro rights. And so would love to learn from you, exchange learnings about this today, if that sounds good.
100%. Well, what's interesting is this particular, I wrote about this executive order just the other day in an article I wrote about how Trump is actually losing in court a lot, which is great because as right-wing as this Supreme Court is, it's actually pleasantly surprising to see them shut down Trump on a lot of key issues. It still doesn't mean I agree with a lot of the terrible rulings, e.g. Roe v. Wade being repealed, and their capitulation to big oil on climate issues, their capitulation to anti-labor on a lot of labor issues. Let's go on. But if we were talking about clearing the very low bar of protecting due process, they are so far, for the most part, doing that, although they could do better. But in this particular case, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell struck down his executive order targeting the Perkins Coie law firm and called it retaliatory. And the words that Judge Beryl used are powerful. She goes, quote, "No American president has ever before issued executive orders like the one it issued. In purpose and effect, this action draws from a playbook as old as Shakespeare, who penned the phrase, 'The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers.' Trump's act is unconstitutional, retaliation, and viewpoint discrimination, plain and simple," end quote. And for those who are unfamiliar with that quote by Shakespeare, it's from one of his plays where they're talking about creating anarchy and destroying society. And the reason that line is often used by folks, I can always tell when someone is trying to flex their literary scholarship but don't actually have any. When they're like, of course everybody hates lawyers, even Shakespeare wanted to kill the lawyers. And I'm like, well, actually, what Shakespeare is talking about is that lawyers are critical to a healthy society because they're the ones who understand the way the law works and they can protect your rights. And I say this as a lawyer who despises lawyers myself. So I get your anger at lawyers in general. But the point that the judge here, Judge Beryl, is making here is that Trump's attempt to go after these law firms, knowing full well that these are the law firms that were there for asylum seekers when 85,000 Afghan refugees were seeking asylum, when they were there providing aid to undocumented mothers crossing the southern border, when we're talking about Ukrainian refugees, right? It was not these for-profit law firms charging $800 an hour representing these individuals. It was pro bono law firms. And what Trump is doing is aggressively going after these law firms for lending their pro bono hours to do something as horrible as helping people who need help. And so it's exciting, really genuinely exciting to see this judge strike this down so aggressively. It's encouraging, and I'm hopeful we can keep building on this in the future.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the ironies I find about the saga of this executive order and the drama of it is that he is going after these private law firms who provide pro bono services to people who need it. But then he's asking for pro bono services himself to help the White House and the administration with all of their court cases.
Right.
So he's literally going after them for things that he's asking for himself, but his are the correct form of pro bono services.
Somebody said this to me once, and I don't want to butcher it, but it was something to the effect of the modern conservative movement has two rules: that there is an in crowd to whom the rules do not apply, and an out crowd to whom the rules exclusively apply.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically where we are, right? He considers himself the in crowd, so the rules don't apply to him. So he can do whatever the hell he wants. But if you're not in his in circle, then you better believe the rules will apply to you in every conceivable punitive way possible. And the hypocrisy here is loud and clear, right? I mean, and we see it in every aspect of it, right? I brought up the Afghan refugees recently. He blocked 1,600 vetted Afghan refugees. And as someone who did immigration law for a while and still works on asylum cases, asylum and refugee are different, but a refugee who is vetted has gone through the most thorough background check imaginable. Like, period. There's a reason why 0 refugees have ever committed an act of violence in the United States, because to get refugee status requires extensive vetting, and they are extremely thorough to get refugee status. 1,600 Afghan refugees that were vetted on their plane flights about to arrive were blocked by Trump arbitrarily because he's a racist, and because he said, well, there's too many people coming into this country. And then he fabricates a genocide in South Africa and says we have to have these white South Afrikaners come into this country. So the hypocrisy is the point, the cruelty is the point, and I'm going to rant a bit about Democrats. What pisses me off about the Democratic Party, and I say this as somebody who's run for Congress as a Democrat, is they're still obsessed with these rules. Like, there are no rules anymore, guys. There's no rules. He's thrown them out the window. Stop playing by some stupid rules that don't exist, and start doing what you need to do to protect the basic rights of the most marginalized among us. Until the Democratic Party learns to do that, Trump is going to keep walking all over them because he knows he can.
Yeah. I think the easiest way that I've learned to explain what you were talking about in the beginning, how they're so hypocritical and, condemn people for the same things that they do, is this okay for me, but not for thee.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And they use that all the time when it comes to abortion, which, is like what our area of expertise is. We're like the same Republican legislators who are passing anti-abortion laws are literally like helping their wives, daughters, and mistresses get abortions themselves. It's fine when they need it, but not when anybody else needs it.
Yeah, I mean, I think your counterpart, your partner in crime, Pari, put out a great video the other day about a woman who did not have an abortion after her father, raped and impregnated her. And the point Pari brought out was so excellent. She goes, I can disagree with her, but the point is it was her choice. And that's exactly the whole point, that on your body, trust women to make the choice that's best for them. And guess what? You actually don't have to agree with them. And that's okay, because that's what life is. You don't have to agree with other people's choices of their own bodies. And it's that hypocrisy that, look, I've come to the conclusion now. It really, for me, it isn't even about any other issue than trust. That's all it is. If we come down to this aspect of trust, then we're good. If we don't come down to trust, like, why don't we let 12-year-old girls adopt a baby? Like, why?
This is the biggest irony, because that would be ridiculous, Qasim. Come on.
A 12-year-old can't take care of a child. Why would we do that?
But they can birth their own child, and they should, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. I remember, first time I ever ran for office about 7-8 years ago. This was in 2018, 2019. A woman who at the time told me she was like 90, 91. She's a retired nurse. And she was, in tears that I remember life before Roe. And I can't imagine us going back to that, because I saw the suffering women went through. And not that I needed to be convinced by her, but, I was at an event and she was just kind of sharing her testimony publicly. And I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, to kind of turn this around on you for a moment. Like, what needs to happen for men to understand that this is not like a fun thing. This is like a very personal, deeply emotional, often extremely painful healthcare decision that nobody takes lightly, and that it actually, we're talking life and death. Like, why? What is it about men that don't like? I'm asking you to explain my gender. Like, what is it about men that? Why are we so
Why
bad at this?
gender?
Yeah, why are we
Yeah,
so bad at this? I don't understand.
I think it's a complex answer, and I'll start with the fact that, you know, 1 in 3 women has had an abortion in the United States, right? So the chances are that you know somebody who has had an abortion.
Yeah.
Knowing someone who's had an abortion is different than them feeling comfortable telling you that they've had an abortion. And the reasons women don't share these medical experiences is because, one, it's personal and they don't have to. There's a lot of medical issues that we don't want to talk about in general, men and women, because they're personal and they're not really anyone's business. So that's like the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is that, a lot of men don't always seem like safe spaces to talk about your abortion with. And so, unfortunately, I feel like the culture in America is such that if you haven't experienced something yourself or know somebody who has, you're not going to care about it. And until we start addressing the stigma that's associated with abortion and helping men make themselves come across as like safe spaces for women to share that type of information with, like there's no relatability on that issue. So a lot of conservatives and MAGA are walking around saying, I don't know anyone who's had an abortion, so I think abortion is wrong. We had someone comment on a post the other day who said all women who have abortions are evil. Evil. And I usually don't engage in these trolling comments, but that like really stood out to me because I was like, does this guy honestly believe that a third of women of reproductive age in this country who have had abortions are legitimately evil? And I asked him that. And he said, yes, I do believe that. And I said, okay, do you know anyone who has had an abortion?
3 women.
You have to know at least some women. And the issue is that you probably don't know that you know them because they haven't shared that with you because you're an a-hole, Um, so I don't know the answer to that, but I know that step one is men knowing women who have gone through this experience.
Yeah, but it's the
And
chicken or the egg, right? Because if
right,
men are sociopaths and women don't feel safe around them, they're not going to
right,
tell them that, right? I mean, I think the best definition of privilege I ever heard is privilege is when something isn't a problem because it isn't a problem for you. And,
right.
right? And I mean, and so you can apply it to wealth privilege, male privilege, white privilege, any aspect of it. If something isn't a problem for you, then it's not a problem, and that's privilege. Like I have male privilege. I can go walking at night at midnight and not have to worry about being assaulted or raped or something like that. That's male privilege. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean I'm better or worse. It's just a reality of life that we live in, unfortunately. And I think where my ranting and advocacy goes, it's just to men. Like look in your circles, look in your circles of influence of what role you need to be playing to counter that disinformation, to counter that misinformation, to counter the taboo of even having these conversations. And I know everybody jokes that like everyone is a group chat away, being leaked away from being canceled and whatnot. And maybe that's true, but at the same time, even in those group chats, I think those are moments where being able to say, "Hey, but seriously, this is a life and death thing, and I don't care what your personal religious beliefs are or aren't, but this is a life and death thing, and we should just trust women and just know our role in the space." Like those little things go a long way. Men aren't going to be magically convinced by other women. Unfortunately, if they would have been, they would have been by now. They're going to be convinced by other men, and that's where I tell men, we have to think about the way we use this language, right? Even the verbiage, violence against women. Like, it's this magical violence that's like falling out of the sky against women. Who knows who's doing it?
Who
I
is
have no
doing the
idea.
violence?
It's just random violence. Like, I was out in the street and this violence came up against me. I don't know who it was, right? Even the words we use completely like remove the men who are committing the violence. against the women. And so, acknowledging that, and then men are like, well, I've never hit a woman before. I'm like, great. Do you want a cookie? Like, that's not a flex. Like, what is wrong with you? That's like the lowest possible bar imaginable. And so for the guys watching this, so think about just for the next week. Here's an exercise just for the next week. Observe your group chats, observe the conversations, especially around younger men, and boys. What is a conversation around them that is kind of defining the way they think about women and girls? Because I can guarantee you, if it's something that you might think as a joke, and maybe even have the maturity to know it's a joke, for a younger person, it's not. For a younger person, that's normalization. And then that's how you move the over to the window. And so be very conscious and deliberate about that. Otherwise, we're getting nowhere closer to addressing the horrific levels of violence men commit against women. And I'll close my rant with this. Understand that violence is not just actual physical violence or actual, sexual assault. It's also when you ban access to health care and make women suffer violent pain and in some cases violent death as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And that's a reality that we need to acknowledge.
I do want to go back to the Skadden case and Rachel Cohen, but before we do that, I want to address the beginning of what you're saying. And I like the way Magnanimous said it, put the actor in the sentence.
Yes.
Because one comment we get a lot on our social media platforms when we're talking about men and violence and how they're left out of the conversation is a lot of men will say, well, if you hate men so much, like, who's going to protect you? Who's going to protect you? And like the cognitive disconnect between protect us from whom is the next question, right? Protect us from men. They don't connect those dots.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny. Like I remember, I can't remember who said this, but it's like somebody made the comment of why do men get so offended if a gay man hits on them? Mm-hmm. And it's because men know what men are capable of, mm-hmm. and that bothers them. And it's like you're admitting to exactly what you're accusing women of being hysterical about. You're just admitting to it right then and there. And I think it's part of the conversation that we need to continue to have. And we've got some right-wing nut jobs on social media trying to sanitize it and trying to pretend mm-hmm. like it's not a big deal. I often tell folks that it should be a cause of deep concern that when you look at the rankings of the top 10 most dangerous countries on earth for women, the United States is in the top 10.
That's Believe crazy.
It or not, it is in the top 10. And if that is not a sounding alarm for you, then unfortunately you're part of the problem. Mm-hmm. It should be a sounding alarm for you. Apply that to any other scenario, and you would agree. If there was a flesh-eating bacteria, and the United States is top 10 in the world for flesh-eating bacteria, you'd be like, well, we better do something to stop this flesh-eating bacteria. Well, this is exactly what's happening with the violence that men commit against women, and we're not taking it seriously. But you had a question about Skadden.
Yeah, so this case has been interesting to me because I think part of what scares me about what's going on with the administration is that Trump is passing executive orders that seemingly have nothing to do with reproductive rights.
Right.
And that have reproductive rights implications. So this executive order we're talking about, what's going on with his attacks on private law firms, doesn't seem to have an obvious connection to repro rights, but it does. And I'll explain why, and then would love to hear your perspective. There was a woman named Rachel Cohen who was an associate at Skadden, which is a major law firm in the US. They were one of the law firms that received the request for information from the EEOC, and which is basically pressuring them to stop providing pro bono services. And as a result, they decided to drop the pro bono services that they were providing to people who needed their legal services for immigration purposes, right? And so Rachel was like, F this, I'm going to quit if they don't change their decision on this, and sent a letter to the HR department and was like, I'm out of here unless you do XYZ thing to restore your integrity in my eyes. I mean, she knew going into this, she's one employee at a huge law firm, but she wanted to take a stand, and she self-acknowledged that she had the privilege to be able to take this stand and possibly lose her job. My understanding is that they didn't actually respond to her contingent resignation request. They actually just cut off her email access and just like cut her out of the firm. And the like hilarious piece of this to me in a not hilarious situation is that she was like, now I have all the time on my hands to talk about this on the internet. So frankly, I would not have learned about this except that she made a TikTok video that went viral about her experience. And now she's done several interviews with traditional media talking about this. And it's really like her resignation from Skadden has now created kind of like a shitstorm PR campaign for them about how Trump's executive orders and what he's doing to law firms are affecting pro bono services. And I started to talk about this in the beginning, that the way that this could affect repro rights down the line is that a lot of the cases that we see go to federal courts and the Supreme Court, the clinics are nonprofits. And so sometimes they are able to pay for legal services, but a lot of times they use pro bono services. And so what happens when Trump has compelled private law firms to stop their pro bono services for unacceptable clients, provide pro bono services to the administration instead, and then these same law firms that could be representing abortion providers, other public health providers, clinics, aren't available to fight these cases, such as the one last year where a couple of organizations were trying to prove that mifepristone wasn't safe and repeal like the FDA approval of it. What happens when clinics aren't able to use those pro bono services? I mean, that is partially what he's setting a precedent for now, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, you're right. It is terrifying. Your analysis is exactly right. This is what he's trying to do. So your grasp is exactly right, and I think you're speaking to the gravity of the situation really precisely and accurately. This is one reason why I'm happy about the ruling by the U.S. District Judge striking down the executive order. He's going to continue to come back and push back on that. Mm-hmm. This is also part of my frustration with kind of the lack of fight we're seeing from the Democrats. Doug Emhoff came out and made former first gentleman made a comment about how, as lawyers, we got to fight against Trump and we got to push back. And then that afternoon, his law firm agreed to a consent decree with the Trump regime.
Oh, I did not know that.
Same day, literally the same day. And I'm like, come on, how are you going to come out here and say this? And then your law firm does the exact same thing the exact same day. That's nonsense to me. So we do have some judicial protection, but the reality is that this exists. And so how do we fight back? Well, one, keep pressuring those who are our electeds to file these lawsuits, to push back. I know about 19 state AGs, attorneys general, elected Democrats have filed some of these lawsuits, and they've been very successful. So that's one. Two, this is where I got a text from Chuck Schumer saying, what will it take for you to donate $10? I said, well, it would take for you to resign and have someone who's an actual fighter, and then I'll max out. But this is not going to happen. So we actually do need to put pressure on our leadership. I don't buy this nonsense of, well, the other side's a fascist regime and we got to support blue no matter who. No, nonsense. That's how we got into this mess. We need new leadership with new fire in their belly who are not going to sit down and capitulate to Trump fascism. It should be a source of deep embarrassment for the Democratic Party establishment that while the opposition party are fascists and destroying due process of law and destroying any semblance of our constitutional rights, you have a lower approval rating. How are you worse than a fascist? What does that say about how pathetic you are and how terrible people think of you, right? It's like, yeah, that's a crap sandwich, and somehow you are rated worse than a crap sandwich. Like, what does that make you? Like, that's the world that we're in right now. And then three, I think this is where we need to invest heavily in, your local pro bono legal aid law firms. Every city, every town has one. You can make those donations. There are immigration law firms. There are nonprofit law firms, nonprofit media, independent writers, and activists. Folks like Pari, right, and Gemma Talks. Subscribe to you guys because this is the work that we're doing. And as much as we would love to quit our full-time jobs and just do this for the goodwill of it, it costs money to live. And so having the resources to do this reporting and to keep folks aware and to represent clients goes a long way. In my pro bono work, when I support women who are survivors of domestic and sexual violence or asylum seekers, I've never taken a fee for that, ever. I've supported women over the last decade and a half, and I've never once taken a fee for this work. But I can tell you, yeah, I mean, but I can tell you, I do it because I consider it a privilege to support individuals in these difficult circumstances, and I'm grateful for those who are able to do things like subscribe, and a cup of coffee a month goes a long way. And so those are kind of the three big things that I'm seeing: pressure our electeds to file these lawsuits, demand the Democratic Party does more to fight and to be more engaged, and then invest your resources, even a couple of bucks a month, into the folks who are doing the pro bono work, who are doing the nonprofit work, because that's how we're going to continue to build a line of defense until hopefully we can get to a point where we can get this orange menace taco, this orange taco.
Get the taco out. It's hilarious to me.
And the fact that he's so offended by it, I think, makes him a soft taco. Just to throw it out there.
Okay, that's. Oh my God. This has been great. I want to close out by shouting out 3 legal defense funds that I love. So if folks want specific places where they can learn more about how to support repro rights from a legal perspective, there's If, When, and How, the Lawyering Project, and the Center for Reproductive Rights, which is a personal fan fave of mine. So I would suggest that in addition to supporting Qasim and I, who are doing a lot of the social media and media work on this, also support the legal defense funds that are doing the hard work in the courts, and will continue to provide these pro bono services regardless of what the orange taco says.
Amen to that, my friend. Thank you for this. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
For anyone on my platform watching, make sure you subscribe to Pari and Eve, Gemma Talks, to Repro Ready. I'm a paid subscriber to them, and I encourage you to be one as well.
Vice versa, Qasim. All right, talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.